And Quest would like to welcome everyone to compare your Peoplesoft data across environments, releases, and platforms presented by Beacon Application Services. And for this session, we are joined by Dan Maude and Ed Burt with Beacon Application Services. And at this time, I'd like to turn the session over. Guys, you can take it away.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us today, folks. Thanks for coming. My name is Dan Maude, and I'm here with Ed Burt, who's going to do the demo for us. And what we're going to talk about today is our new product called Beam Compare. Beam stands for Beacon's Enterprise Application Manager. This is a product we built for Peoplesoft users, and that's what we're going to walk through today. So Beacon's been implementing and upgrading Peoplesoft for over 20 years. We're a Peoplesoft Platinum partner. We love Peoplesoft. It's scalable, it's reliable, it's flexible, but it can be a challenge to manage and administer. And Beam Compare's goal is to make that an easier task for us and for you. So our agenda today is pretty straightforward. A few minutes about who we are, a few more minutes about what managing Peoplesoft data means, how we're looking at the problem, how Beam works, and then we're going to demo the product, and we'll probably spend at least half the session on the demo. Again, if you have any questions, you can type them in, and we'll either get them when we see them right away if they make sense, or we'll save them to the end. As I mentioned, Beacon has been working with Peoplesoft since 1992. We've done hundreds and hundreds of implementations and upgrades. We're a Platinum partner. Beam is a separate division of Beacon. We have 3 products in the Beam family. We have, along with Beam Compare, we have a product called Beam Change, excuse me, which automates your migrations. And we have a product called Beam Test, which automates your testing. Both of these products, all 3 of these products, are designed to work with Peoplesoft and Peoplesoft metadata. So let's get right to it. Managing Peoplesoft can be a challenge, is a challenge, has been a challenge, and essentially, whether it's Peoplesoft or any really big enterprise application, the basic principles for managing applications effectively are pretty straightforward at the high-end level. Simplification, standardization, communication, and automation. I think most Peoplesoft customers have done a pretty good job. Your businesses aren't simple, but you have simplified your processes, and over the years, people have gone and consolidated their instances, and things from a running the system standpoint, I think most of these principles have been followed fairly well. I think on the IT side, though, some of that simplification and standardization has not quite been there, and I think part of the problem is the lack of automation in some areas of Peoplesoft. It's just difficult to handle the data, especially when we go across instances. Peoplesoft was designed to build apps, to run apps, but it was really not designed to manage applications, and I think that's especially true when we get across instances. Peoplesoft and PeopleTools is brilliant within its instance, but it is constrained or bound within that instance, and it really is, in a sense, ignorant of all the other instances when it's running. So one way of looking at this is Dave Duffield was a very clever guy when he named Peoplesoft, combining people and software into one catchy company name. And he was smart to put people first. But I think basically when you think about this, there are some advantages that software has over us humans, and there's some advantages us humans have over software. And I think these are pretty straightforward, but I think it's a good context to think about this, because I think in a lot of cases we're trying to do things that the software should be doing for us. So software just pretty basically is fast at calculating things. It doesn't make errors, it's consistent. It doesn't get lazy, software doesn't get tired. It will run until it's done with all your data. It doesn't get emotional. Software doesn't get frustrated, and software products don't get overconfident. They just run. They're emotionless. People have some advantages that software doesn't have. Primarily, we're flexible beings, and we can shift gears. We can solve problems. We don't have to follow the code. We can be imaginative, we can be creative, we're able to reason in most cases. People are pretty good at that, and we have the ability to learn. So each component has some advantages, but the problem in managing PeopleSoft anyways is that as an administrator or developer or IT auditor, you're not really able to do these great problem-solving things you'd like to do because you got to spend all your time finding the problem first. It takes a lot of time in most shops to find problems. Sometimes they're quick, sometimes they're not obvious. But in any case, you're not a machine. Your strengths are not the strengths of software, and you'd like to be spending more time solving problems and less time finding the problems. A good description of this, I think, when I was explaining our Beam Compare design to one of our consulting customers a year or two back, I asked him what he thought about it, and after he listened to our explanation, he said, you know, Dan, I spent my whole life looking for differences. And I don't think that's a very unusual statement for an IT manager in PeopleSoft shop to say. David, I think, was just finishing up an upgrade, which might make his difference looking even more challenging or more consuming than usual. But I think, you know, essentially many people are spending their whole life, or spending much of their time, if not their whole lives, looking for these differences. So let's look at Beam, let's look at PeopleSoft pretty straightforwardly. And at the most simplest level, I can draw PeopleSoft and Beam architecture. This is what we have. You have instances in PeopleSoft, dev, prod, stage, test, demo, maybe more, and you have yourself. And most of the time you are trying to figure out what's going on in those environments. And you can write a lot of SQL, you can run a lot of queries, but finding out what's going on in those environments is not a simple task. In fact, I think it can be so time-consuming that there's a lot of companies that we see that almost deliberately discourage changes to PeopleSoft because it's just so hard to make them and to validate them and to test them and to migrate them through. So you got environments and you got yourself, and I think that's a pretty basic environment. So what we're proposing is to build one more environment, a blank PeopleSoft, a PTSys environment, and then we're going to load our Beam project, which is built in PeopleTools, into this PTSys environment. By doing it this way, you have no footprint in any of your environments, and you're using PeopleSoft, a dedicated PeopleSoft instance, to manage and control and compare all your other PeopleSoft environments. So what that lets you do is get you out of the finding things and back into the roles that you'd like to be in, solving problems and adding some value to your organization. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk through and look at some of the things we've done to do things, but what we're trying to show you is that we're trying to get you out of the middle of looking for things and get you into areas where you can troubleshoot your problems, answer help desk questions, verify data. You know, verifying data in a lot of ways is kind of the mirror of troubleshooting. You don't want to find any differences in some cases. So what we're trying to do is give you a single, consistent way to handle all these different roles and responsibilities that you have in your organization. So Beam is a PeopleSoft environment, Beam Sys, and one way to explain it is to just look at your standard, typical migration path, and now you have a tool that when you're migrating things through your paths, you can compare these different environments and see if there are any differences. Now when we say compare, we're talking about comparing data and objects, your configuration data, and all the structures that go with that data, not just what you're doing in App Designer. App Designer is terrific. We're not trying to replace it, but what we are trying to do is bring you a perspective that neither App Designer or really any of the other Peoplesoft tools are able to give you from a data perspective. So this is pretty straightforward. If you move something from dev to test, whether it's a patch, whether it's just some configuration data, we can run a job and we can compare the two environments and see if they are still the same or not and tell you what the differences are. But life is a little more complicated than just moving things from one environment to another. You might want to compare two different dev environments. You might want to compare a 9.1 environment to a 9.2 environment. So why would you want to do that? Well, if you're planning an upgrade, you might want to do some assessment or impact analysis. You might want to look and see what's different. But more likely, what you're wanting to do is once you moved your data or converted your data from 9.1 to 9.2, you probably want to compare those two things to see if the data is still the same. Anybody who's gone through an upgrade either recently or in the past knows that a move to production requires a data validation phase. And it requires finding a bunch of users, asking them a bunch of questions, having them look at a bunch of reports, and validating that the data that is taken from 9.1 and converted to 9.2 is still the same. We can do that for you now by running a job that compares records that are owned by a particular module. So let's kind of sum up all the things Beam can compare. Again, we're comparing data and the data structures, and we're comparing either specific targeted objects or your whole database. You get to choose all those things, and we'll show you this in a few minutes. So at its basic, we're comparing two instances across instances, and most people think of this, and rightly so, as comparing, say, test to prod. That's pretty straightforward. We do that just fine. You can also compare different releases. So as I mentioned in the earlier example, you might compare a 9.1 database to a 9.2 or an 8.9 to a 9.1. I mean, it doesn't matter. You can compare two different releases to each other. You might compare two different platforms. You might compare Peoplesoft 8.5.2 to 8.5.3. Again, you might be doing this because you're doing an upgrade, or you might be doing it because some of your applications are running on 8.5.2 and some of them are running on 8.5.3. Again, Beam Compare doesn't really care about those distinctions. You might also want to compare financials to HR, or HCM as the politically correct call it now. Why would you want to do this? Well, most HCM systems pass a pretty large amount of accounting data over to GL on a bi-weekly or weekly or monthly payroll process, and it would be nice to know if all the departments are the same between your two pillars or your two product suites. So as long as we have records with common keys, this is the essential part of Beam Compare. If you have records with common keys, you can compare between essentially any two instances, which is my next point. It doesn't matter instance A and instance B, source and target. If there are records that have shared keys, we can compare them. And just to make this a little bit more interesting, you can compare your source to any number of targets. And there's a limit eventually to that with DB links, but when you're looking across your instances, perhaps at permission lists or security, you might want to build a workspace where you can look at 4 or 5 or 6 environments at the same time and see if they're all in sync, which is a very nice thing to be able to do. So all the jobs that we run in Beam compare the database data and the structure, or the data and the metadata, I guess is the right way to say this in the Peoplesoft world. Our customers, we find this a very useful tool. So let's go back to where we were. Your roles, the jobs you want to be doing, are in the red boxes, and our software is in the middle, Beam. And let's take a look at the kind of compare things we've set up for you to use. We pre-built or predefined a variety of things based on how Peoplesoft is structured and organized and based on how people have to deal with it. And there's really like 3 categories or groups, and these are pretty logical, I think, as you'll see. The first set of methods, or the first set of compare methods that we have are structured around or related to what Peoplesoft has as objects. So the first thing you can compare is classes. Now, Peoplesoft only puts classes in People Tools. They just ran out of energy before they could put classes within all the applications, I guess. But these are pretty helpful things to have, and you as a developer or as a group of developers can build your own classes. You can group any records together, call them something, and that becomes a class, and you can compare all the records in that class by running the compare class job. We can compare it by component. We'll compare all the records in a specific component. We'll ask you which component you want to compare, and then we'll figure out all the records in that component, and we'll compare them all. I guess components are a class, kind of a group of pages, so we also do pages. We compare records. So you select a record, and we will compare it and find all the differences across your environments. I mentioned this one earlier. This is a fairly powerful and extremely time-saving method. This is records owned by, which most of you know. All records in Peoplesoft are owned by a module. And we can take all the records and all the tables that are owned by a module and compare them all and find any and all differences at one time and show them to you. We can compare records within a project. We again compare the data in the tables. So we don't compare people code. You're still going to use App Designer when you want to do that. But getting down to the structure and the data in the tables by a project is compare records in project. And then we can compare records in fields. Pick a field, any field, and we'll find all the records that has that field in it, and then we'll compare all those records to make sure they're the same. This is helpful in troubleshooting. Might also be helpful if you have custom fields that you've added. We'll find where they are for you without too much trouble. These are specialized, more specific records that we built some custom methods for because people seem to have trouble with these areas. They're just always checking to find out what's different and what's the same trees, have structures and values, leaves and everything. We compare all the tree aspects to you across environments. Security objects and users and permissionless are another area that a lot of people spend a lot of time looking across their environments to make sure these are set correctly. Oddly, in these areas, there probably should be some differences in security. Probably prod is different than test. Development is probably different also. But setting these, maintaining these, observing these security and tree areas, we have specific methods to compare those across your instances. And then the last class or last group of methods that we've developed are for database level analysis. So we have a compare method that compares all your Peoplesoft field definitions. Again, environment A versus environment B, compares your Peoplesoft system tables, compares your pages and page fields, compares your components. Again, these are kind of parallel to the object-oriented ones we had early, but this is across your entire database, whereas before we were comparing a single component. In this particular case, we're comparing all your components. And depending on where you're at and which role you're playing, you would choose one or the other, or you might choose one and then the other, depending on what your results are. We have a method for PSREC field to compare your record field combinations, and then a very popular compare method is compare all the objects that have changed recently, and the parameter you give us is number of days. We will compare all the objects that have changed in the last, say, 7 days and tell you if any of them are different. So these are the types of compares that we deliver. You run these out of the box. Typically, we install a Beam project in our PTSys in a couple hours, and you can be running these methods. They're all set up, ready to go within the next day or so. So let's go back to where we started, which is we've got software to help you do the roles that you have within your environments. And at this point, I think I'd like to turn over to Ed and let him show you what I've been talking about.
Thanks, Dan. Just before I log into the actual system, a couple terminology points so you have a sense of how Beam Compare is structured. And it's made up of really three main elements. The job, which is our processing wrappers, functions very much like run control that you see in Peoplesoft to execute processes. The methods that Dan mentioned. So we run a specific method that tells us how and what to compare, and then we provide a dashboard which gives you the ability to monitor and see all the results of your Beam jobs. The jobs and the methods will trigger specific parameters, so you know which specific component, which specific record will be prompted for you. And then we also have advanced functionality such as filters and workspaces, and we'll get into all of that shortly here. So I'm going to leave the PowerPoint and actually log into the Beam system. So as you see, I'm logging into standard Peoplesoft database. This started as a People Tools database. We've loaded the Beam project into the system. So now Beam Compare is up and running, ready for our use. The easiest way for you to get a sense of this product is, let me first run a simple job. So I'll go to our jobs to select the record compare. Running the record compare, it asks me for which specific record I would like to compare. We're prompted for it. We select the record. In this case, I'll take the department record. Ask me for my options. I want to review the structure and the data. Do I want to include or exclude the specific People Tools tables? In this case, we're doing the specific department table. We'll kick that off. Okay. As I mentioned, the job page is our run control. So you see at the high level, what it's asking us for is what is your source and what is your target environment that you would like to compare. So I've selected a financial environment, financial A versus financial B. Okay. Source and target, two different environments. Which method would I like to compare? I'm going to compare a specific record. Dan mentioned all our delivered methods. I do have the option to pick any of those methods at that point. And then with our job, we also have some processing options. I can run the job in the background right now, or I can actually schedule the job and run it through Process Scheduler. Basic run control for our process. That process has completed, so I'm going to go to the dashboard and we'll actually take a look at the results from that job. So here is our record compare department table that ran in 38 seconds. I'll bring up the details. All our results are presented through this dashboard, so you're getting a common result, common view of all those results. We get a job log. Key tab that you're looking for is the Results tab. The Results tab gives me a summary view through the detail, so I can drill down to the specific detail. We see that in our department table we have 11 differences. I can drill down and now see that those 11 differences are made up of a couple different scenarios. In this example, we're actually showing you every possible scenario where a difference could occur. The difference could be that the row itself exists in the source environment but does not exist in the target environment, or vice versa. The row actually is on the source but not in the target. And when that situation occurs, I can drill to the detail and actually see the key of that row that exists in one environment but not the other. So the department 70113, that's the key of the department table, exists in our source but is not found in the department table. I mean in the target environment. If the row is in both environments, but data values are different, we tell you the field, and you can again drill down right into the details. So the budgetary only field is set differently in our environments for two specific departments. In one environment, the switch is turned off. The other environment, it's turned on, and vice versa for these two specific departments. Effective status. For the Admin 120 department, it's inactive in one environment, active in another environment. So Beam Compare has analyzed the entire department table, looked at every field, found the field differences, and displays the exact difference for you. So today, people are getting at this information by running multiple queries, trying to mesh those together to get an answer set, or by actually opening up the system in two different browsers and trying to browse through the pages. Beam Compare is doing all that work for you in zeroing in and presenting the exact difference for you. So there's all our differences on the department table. In this case, we also selected the structure too. So analyze the department table, but also tell me if there's any metadata differences in this environment with the way the department table is defined. So we actually can look right at the people tools tables, the record definition, the field definition, to see if there's any structure differences. No differences in our record definition, no differences in the Peoplesoft record field definition, but we do have some differences in the DB field definition. So again, we can drill down to them. It's telling us our last update field is different, and in this case, we've got a different date and time stamp difference on a few fields in the system. Red flag, see the summary level difference, but the actual detail does not impact the system there. So as you know, the power of Peoplesoft comes in its data, its configuration data, its personalization. All those options that you get to define into the system is spread across multiple tables and driven by the actual data values. Beam Compare now lets us get right at those data values to manage those. Our example was a quick record definition. I returned to the dashboard, ran a couple other examples just before we started the conference here. Dan mentioned a component compare. So how often have you had a process work in one environment but work differently or not at all in another environment? So we can do a quick Control-Alt-J, get the component name out of that environment, and then run a compare against that component. So in this case, I've run a component compare against the asset entry component. I bring up that result. It's showing me that by inputting that asset entry component, the system went out and grabbed 33 total records to be used in that component. So I didn't have to figure out the 33 tables that Peoplesoft has defined to the asset component. All I had to do was give Beam Compare the component name. It went out and found and analyzed all 33 of those tables. Now, if you know a little bit about asset management, we see the asset table with 232 differences, the acquisition detail table with almost 200 differences. Well, those are transactional tables. That makes sense. You may have different transactions in your test system versus your training system. Okay? But as I scroll through this and I see my business unit table has differences, well, your business unit table is where you're setting your business controls, your operational settings. You know, that's a red flag. Why do I have business unit differences between my two systems? So I can drill down to those differences and I can see the exact settings that have been set differently. In one environment, the automatic retirement switch is turned to yes, so it's active, whereas another environment, that switch is off. That would, in fact, trigger logic and processing differences between the two environments. The capital threshold settings or switch, again, turned off in one environment, on in another environment, driving processing differences. So by going after the component level, Beam Compare is smart enough to go out and get all the associated records with that component and do the analysis for them. In our component compare, we also included the structure. So again, now I'm seeing structural information here. My Peoplesoft record definition and field definition have differences. If I look at the field definitions, we see that my edit switches are different. So in one environment, I have prompt editing turned on with a prompt table, whereas I don't have that option turned on in another. So again, by going after that component, I'm seeing the data that's driving logical changes and some of the metadata that could be driving these logical changes between your two systems. Now, because we read the Peoplesoft, the People Tools level information, if you had any customization into the system, that would automatically be pulled into the process and analyzed along with the delivered information, because all that information is into your data and into your metadata, so Beam Compare can pull all that together. Another common compare is by class. So as Dan mentioned, a classification of records is just really a logical grouping of records. We deliver this so that you can free-form create your own classes. So we've created a class called the banking configuration, and I've run the class compare against the banking configuration. So that went out, and it took the 23 records in my class and did all the analysis across those records. Very common to take your business logic, your configuration tables, and put them in a class so that you can analyze the full configuration across your environments. So I am seeing configuration differences between these two environments. The account status in one environment is active and inactive between the two environments. In this case, here's the key, the Australian bank. The operator last update field actually shows me who the operator was that may have made those changes in the two environments. So again, it looks like there was some maintenance done on the Australian bank. So your configuration is different between the two environments. The code table, bank status, again, we're seeing the keys. Active settings in one environment, inactive another, all being tied back to that Australian bank settings. quick analysis over 20 tables making up your banking configuration, and you can drill down and see all the details there. Now, we've been talking about this from a troubleshooting perspective. Something's operating differently, or there's a problem in one environment different than the other environment, and now we have a tool to drill down right and find out what might be triggering that environment. You can switch the usage of Beam Compare to go from this reactive troubleshooting mode to be used in a proactive manner, especially to deal with your migrations. So that if I've run a data mover and I'm actually migrating configuration data from one environment to the next, the data mover gives you a row count. That does not give you any real details. So people are spending a lot of time to retest migrations. Now you can run a class compare or another beam compare job and actually prove that the data is the same now in two environments. And in many cases, what makes up the real controls and logic in Peoplesoft is not just the data, but the metadata. So in our banking configuration, the data triggers SQL objects as well. So that if data movers were run against banking configuration, you would in fact be creating a logical problem in your two environments. Those SQL objects have to be managed together with the data. So I can build a class that has both my business configuration tables and my people tools tables so that I can do that compare and analysis and actually hit both sides of it. One, to find the differences. So in this case, we migrated business data, but the SQL objects themselves have not been managed properly. So we can put this type of compare at the end of a migration process, looking for things improving that things are the same. So you've got both the reactive approach to using compare as well as the proactive validation for compare. And that proactive validation has been used for upgrade scenarios when we actually look at all the records associated with the module. So Dan had mentioned the compare by owner. The owner ID, in this case FAR, the AR system, will go out and do the compare, and it will pull in every table associated with that owner that has that owner ID. So it did the analysis of all 242 tables associated with the AR system. So at certain times in your upgrade processing, where you're doing a test move 1, test move 2, and you expect everything to be the same, you can run this compare, prove that you've got no differences, and then rest assured that your upgrade has in fact processed properly without having to go through all the additional testing steps. So in one quick shot, the compare by owner ID field will analyze all tables associated with that specific module. Again, knowing that we're hitting the Peoplesoft and People Tools level information, your customization will be automatically included right into that process. So I'll bring up one of the People Tools tables. So in this case, you do have records that are in one environment, not in another, and using our customization naming convention is the ZZ. So that customization is automatically incorporated into the analysis so that you're getting all the information in one shot here. We do have advanced functionality so that we can use filters, so that you can attach filters to the methods to exclude common things like dates, version numbers, date time stamps, so that you don't have to bring that into the process, so that if you're running reports and want to feed those off to auditing or to support something there, you can exclude some of the things that are typically different but don't drive any logical differences or any issues there. And by being in Peoplesoft, all the People Tools functionality, I can sort and total, push the results out, download them out to Excel, etc. All that functionality is built right into the process here. And one of the other key functions is our Beam workspaces. Beam workspaces allow you to actually set up and organize your work so that if you have multiple users using Beam, that their results, their information is kind of separated so you don't have to sort through everybody's work in the dashboard. And maybe even more importantly, you get to put your common environments into your workspace. And with one job, you can take a source environment and compare it against multiple target environments. So for gold configuration type environments, you could take that as your source and in one job compare it across your entire platform to find your differences there. And that, in a nutshell, is our Beam Compare. Very easy to use, yet very powerful and very flexible, going after the real detail of Peoplesoft that helps you take advantage of the power of Peoplesoft. The flexibility and the customization of Peoplesoft at a metadata level and a personalization level is all driven by the data, and now we have a tool that can finally help you analyze and manage that data. Anything to add, Dan, before we open it up to questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Ed. I'd like to quickly remind all the attendees out there that if you do have any questions for us, you can feel free to enter those into the questions module now. Otherwise, if you do think of anything after this presentation has ended, you can also feel free to reach out to me at onlinelearning@questdirect.org as well. And then, Ed, I haven't received any questions yet, so if there's anything else you'd like to summarize, I think now would be a good time. But otherwise, if not, if we don't receive any questions in the next couple minutes, we can go ahead and close it out a little bit early for you.
Okay.
And then, Ed, if there is any of the attendees on the call that do have any questions about this product, do you have any contact information that one of our attendees could get in contact with you at?
Yes, the best way is you can contact us right through the main office at Beacon, okay, and email. It's on the presentation here, so we will have both of them posted for you.
I appreciate it very much, Ed.
Okay.
And then I still haven't received any questions, so I think if we don't have anything else left to cover, I think we can probably go ahead and close it out for you.
All right, Derek, I do have one common question that was submitted earlier.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's regarded people code compare. So one of the common questions is, can you compare people code? And to a degree, the answer is yes. But as Dan mentioned earlier, we're not trying to replace App Designer. So App Designer is really your key to manage your development work. But for People Code, in the newer versions of People Tools, they are storing the People Code data in a text format on a People Tools table. So we can, in fact, go out and run the compare against that People Tools table and find where the actual differences are. Now, our differences will tell you what People Code objects are different, either in the database or missing from another environment. Okay? And it will, in fact, tell you which ones may be different. But again, that People Code, the values themselves are stored in an encrypted type fashion. So you're not going to see the clean data value that you saw with our switches and most other data fields, but you will, in fact, find the areas in the records in your system where there are People Code differences that you could then go back to App Designer and use the more appropriate tool for. Okay? So it will work on People Tools levels tables, does give you some very good information related to things like People Code, but again, we're not trying to replace an existing tool that Peoplesoft delivers. The real power of compare is that it's going after the data that no other tool was providing for you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ed. I still haven't received any questions left, so if there's anything else that you'd like to cover, I think, feel free to at this point, but otherwise we've got about 10 minutes left for our scheduled time, so it's up to you at this point, Ed.
No, at this point, I think we're good, Derek. Thank you. Again, easy to use tool, high level right now, but we're not trying to do a training class on it. So if there are no other questions, we should be good to close.
Well, hey, I really appreciate you jumping on the call this afternoon, Ed. I know it can be a little difficult to get schedules together this time of year, and so we really appreciate you coming together and then delivering the session for us and sharing your expertise with everybody on the call today. So thank you for that. And
our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. And then with that, I would also like to thank all the attendees for joining today's webinar session, Compare Your Peoplesoft Data Across Environments, Releases, and Platforms, brought to you by Beacon Application Services and Quest Online Learning. And everybody on the call today can be on the lookout for a session evaluation arriving shortly after the conclusion of this presentation. And then once again, I would just like to quickly mention that we did record this session, and we'll make that video recording available in the online learning library at questdirect.org. I'll also go ahead and reach out to all the attendees and explain how to access that once it is available. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody once again for joining us, and we hope to see you soon on another Quest Online Learning event.